"Put the candles out, Dad. They're making the smoke alarm twitchy," Charles said, already waving at the ceiling as if rescuing a panicking bird. "I barely breathed on them," I said. "Yeah, but the detector's ancient," he laughed, eyes sliding to the other man at the table, his father-in-law. "You know how this building is. I live above my own shop on 26th and Albany in Chicago. The building is 62 like Mino. That's not true. I'm 64. The building is 81 and still square against the wind." We were in my kitchen, which I keep clean the way some men keep a prayer book rags folded, steel shining, crumbs cornered. My granddaughter, Emma, drummed her fingers on the formica, a small yellow rhythm against the blue. Her mother told her to stop. Her mother never tells Charles to stop anything. "Dad, open ours first," Charles said, pushing the plastic bag toward me like a waiter sliding a check. "Sure," I said. I know plastic by sound. This was the thin, apologetic kind you get at discount stores that sell belts that curl by Wednesday. Inside, flip-flops, size 11, gray. Price tag still on. $15. "They're good for your feet," my daughter-in-law said. "Orthopedic foam. Foam has never fixed a spine," I said, and smiled so it would pass as humor. I kept the smile on until the corners of my mouth ached. Then I set the gift gently by the sink, as if it might bruise. "Now you," my son said, turning to his father-in-law with a little flourish. "We figured, life is short. Keys in a velvet pouch, a paper folded like a diploma, a bow serious enough for a funeral." When the older man shook the pouch, something heavy spoke. "Come downstairs," Charles said, already buoyant, already narrating for the small audience of Emma and my sister's boy, who was FaceTiming from Berwyn. "Dad, you'll get a kick out of this." He said "Dad" and looked right through me. If invisibility had a temperature, it was the mildness in that room. The thermostat set to 72. The roast cooling, the lemon bars sweating sugar. The Lexus sat at the curb like a new tooth, white with a black roof, obscene as clean money. The father-in-law cried the polite tears of a man whose wallet has never known lint. There was applause from the sidewalk neighbors, students from the community college, a couple from the taqueria across the way holding foil-wrapped burritos like microphones. "50,000, Charles said, loudly enough to put a price on love. "He deserves it. Do you know what a man does with his hands when there's nothing left to grip? He finds his pockets, or his wrists, or a ghost of a wrench, and holds it in the air by memory." I pressed my thumb into the old scar by my knuckle, where a socket once slipped. The nerve still sparks in rain. "Dad, take a picture for us," my daughter-in-law said, handing me her phone. "Of course," I said. The camera was already open, their faces arranged into a magazine forgiveness I was never offered. The father-in-law put his arm around my son, and my son leaned in the way boys lean toward the man who signs their report cards. "Say cheese," I said. I kept my voice steady and warm, the way a good mechanic keeps a torch safe around fuel. They smiled. The Lexus caught the last light, and for a second the chrome was a mirror, and I could see myself. A man who had confused sacrifice with love for so long the two words had the same poor posture. Back upstairs, Emma climbed onto my lap with a lemon bar and powdered my jeans with sugar. "Can I put a candle in the flip-flop?" she asked. "It's yours to redesign," I said. She giggled. Her mother said, "Emma, in the way that means laughter is a resource we ration." "Dad," Charles said, opening the fridge without asking, the way he does in every room I pay for. "You're out of oat milk." "I am not a cow," I said. "I don't keep oats." "You're impossible," he said, but lightly, as if it were a charm he wore on a bracelet. I sliced the roast. I set plates. The knife squeaked against the cheap porcelain I refused to replace. It is my small rebellion, keeping things that still work. "So," I said, "how's the clinic?" "We're scaling," my daughter-in-law said, straightening up, her voice a little frost. "The city likes numbers. We like people." She is a therapist. She has a framed degree and an allergy to dust, both proudly displayed. She grew up in a half-renovated house by the lake where every imperfection was called a phase. Her father calls me buddy, the way a man calls an Uber temporary, useful, tip optional. That's good, I said. Scaling is good if you remember the bolts. Dad, Charles said, we've been meaning to talk about rent. If you have ever lifted a hood and seen a nest where an engine should be, you know the feeling. A private ruin. What about it? I asked. We're providing care. Community impact. The city loves that. We were thinking. He looked at his wife, who nodded, of a more flexible arrangement. Flexible like a flip-flop? I asked. He laughed, mishearing the knife. We're family, my daughter-in-law said. It doesn't feel right to be so transactional. Emma watched my face with the solemn curiosity of children at a magic show, waiting for the dove. I agree, I said. Nothing about the last hour felt transactional. She blinked. Charles said, Dad, warning and appeal at once. The father-in-law cleared his throat in the living room to remind us he owned some air. My building makes a sound at night, a settling sigh. I heard it then, even though the sun was still up. The old brick remembered every winter. The lintels know the names of men who carried them. We ate. No one tasted. When it was done, I washed dishes the way a surgeon closes, efficiently, leaving no opportunity for infection. Emma drew a car on a napkin and gave it wheel eyelashes. It's you, she said. You drive on Sundays. I do, I said. Will you teach me? If you promise to treat machines like animals, you don't force them. You listen. My daughter-in-law said, Emma, homework. Though it was Sunday in August, and the only assignment was to believe in adulthood. After they left, after the Lexus purred away like a cat that knows which bowl is crystal, my kitchen felt like a body without its arguments. On the table sat the flip-flops, gray as rainwater, and the velvet pouch that had held another man's joy. I held the sandals. They were light. A child could fling them at a ceiling fan and watch them pinwheel. I am a mechanic. I know the weight of things. These had none. I needed the silence of my tools. I took the stairs down, and the shop welcomed me with its familiar smell of solvent and rubber and the old metallic breath of Chicago itself. I have a cot in the back, not because I must, but because I like to sleep where my hands earned the day. When my wife left years back, a departure arranged like a tidy crime, this was the place that did not ask me to perform an explanation. The fluorescent lights hummed. They've hummed for decades. It is how they remember their purpose. A man called Frank carved his name into the concrete near the press in 1978. He died in a steel mill fire and left a son who became a cop who brings me donuts every other Thursday. The shop is a city of fossils. There is a point at which a man realizes the silence he keeps is not virtue, but complicity. You don't know you're a ghost until someone hands you a camera and asks you to prove they exist. I put the flip-flops on the workbench. I lined them with a pencil. I wrote the date on the sole, August 23rd. Then I picked up the phone. Hi, Nora, I said when my daughter-in-law answered, voice crisp as an invoice. You and Charles need to be out of the clinic by Friday. Silence. An expensive silence. You could hear the Lexus in it. For the first time in 43 years, I said, I'm doing a thing for me. Orlando, she said at last, low and calm, the way people speak to a dog who's wandered into their yard. Let's not escalate. We already did, I said. We escalated a car onto the curb and a father off his own birthday. I think you're being emotional, and I think you've been economical with my humanity for years. The lime landed not like a knife, but like a socket wrenched solid and final. She inhaled a new set of words, then put me on speaker. I heard Charles ask, "What's up?" as if a cloud had called. "Tell him," I said. "Your father is asking us to vacate," she said, neutrally, syllables zipped. "Dad?" Charles said. I could picture him standing barefoot on their immaculate rug, the one Emma is not allowed to snack near. "What is this?" "It's rent, Charlie," I said, and the old nickname came out like a wrench I hadn't lifted in years. Still oiled, still true. It's respect. It's the moment where a man takes the keys back from the boy who parked him. You do this to your own son? I do this for him, I said, so that the next thing you give a man whose name is not mine costs you, at least, your own wallet. No one spoke. In the silence, my lights hummed their faithful hymn. Outside, the wind worried the alleyweeds. The city kept breathing. So did I. The call started the next morning. First Nora, her voice trimmed and pressed like her office suits. She spoke of misunderstandings, of family unity, of legacy. Words that, if you stripped them down to metal, meant, keep things as they are, old man. I listened while tightening a lug nut on a Corolla. The wrench slipped, barked my knuckle, and I didn't even curse. Pain felt clarified. By noon Charles called. His tone carried the stunned politeness of someone who has been bumped off a stage, but is still bowing. Dad, maybe you're overreacting. We can figure something out. I figured, I said. Friday. You can't just evict your own son. I'm not evicting. I'm billing. Rent, like any other tenant. There was silence. Then his sigh, half relief, half wounded pride. You know what Mom would say? She already said it, I answered, surprising both of us. She said it when she left. By Wednesday, the clinic sent Emma with a drawing. A house, square, with my shop beneath it, and everyone inside smiling with balloon cheeks. She placed it on my workbench with ceremony. Mom says you're confused, Grandpa, that you're mad at Daddy for nothing. Children are good at repeating scripts. They memorize tone before meaning. I lifted her onto the stool, wiped grease from my hands onto a rag, and looked at the colors. Emma, do you think this house looks real? She squinted. It needs a door. Exactly. Without a door, who decides who comes in? She frowned, thinking, the people inside? Or the man who built it? I said softly. She chewed her lip, caught between loyalty and imagination. Then she smiled suddenly, reaching for another crayon. I'll draw the door, big and red, so everyone knows it's yours. I kissed her hair. Later, when Nora picked her up, she glanced at the paper and froze, then tucked it quickly into her purse as if it were contraband. Friday came. I changed the locks before sunrise, my hand steady. The building groaned approval. At 10 sharp, Charles arrived, pounding the door with the indignation of someone who has never been denied entry. I opened it halfway. You really did it, he said, incredulous. I did. This is insane. Do you know how disruptive this is for our patients? You'll find another space. We built this clinic from nothing. You built it from me, I said, from what I worked for since I was 14, from the steel of this building, from every bolt I turned to keep the lights on. Don't rewrite the manual while the engine's still warm. His face flushed. I thought you wanted me to succeed. I do, but not on my corpse. Behind him, Nora waited in the car, engine idling, eyes sharp as a hawk's. She didn't come out. That's her style, let others crash first. Charles shook his head, that theatrical disappointment he learned in school plays. You'll regret this. I've been regretting not doing it sooner, I said, and shut the door. Winter arrived early that year, sharp and uninvited. The days shortened into a narrow gray light. Some days, no customers came at all. I'd hear the wind whistling through the alley where Emma's laughter used to bounce off the bricks. The space heater hummed its one-note song. I found an old wrench of Charles's, the one he'd used as a boy, tucked away in a drawer. For a week, I left it on the workbench, a small, metallic ghost. I almost called him a dozen times. My hand would hover over the phone, but I'd remember the weight of those flip-flops, the sound of the Lexus purring, and I'd pick up a real wrench instead and find something, anything, to tighten. Silence, I learned, is a different kind of loud. Rumors trickled in with the slush. Mrs. Carp mentioned the clinic had lost its lease on a bigger space. The barista at the corner shop said she'd seen Charles and Nora arguing by their car, voices sharp enough to cut the frosty air. I said nothing, but I listened, and I understood the consequences, like rust, work slowly but never sleep. The days after were quieter than I expected. I thought grief would rattle the pipes, that guilt would scratch at the windows. Instead, the shop felt wider, my breathing unlabored. Customers noticed. "You look younger, Orlando," Mrs. Carp from down the street said when she came for an oil change. "What's your secret?" "Finally slept," I told her. Still, evenings had their ghosts. I'd catch myself setting an extra plate or listening for the thud of Emma's backpack. Habits built over decades do not vanish. They taper, like old spark plugs, less fire, still present. I force myself to write receipts by hand, to catalog spare parts, to do things I'd neglected in my own life while repairing everyone else's. One night, I went through a shoebox of papers, leases, old invoices, tax receipts. I found the deed to the building, yellowed but firm. My name written there, not Charles's, not Nora's, not the father-in-law's, mine. I framed it and hung it by the shop's entrance, a modest, paper-thin monument. They didn't vanish, of course. By the second week, Nora arrived in person, crisp blouse, clipped stride, carrying Emma like a diplomatic offering. "She misses you," she said. "I miss her too." Then stop this nonsense. I looked at Emma, who was holding her drawing now with the red door. "Sweetheart, wait in the car a minute." When she was gone, Nora leaned in. "You're sabotaging your son's future." "No, I'm teaching him the cost of it. Money isn't everything." "You're right," I said. "Respect is." She stared at me, calculating angles, searching for rust in my armor. But I was steel now, tempered. Finally, she muttered, "You'll die alone in this garage. I'd rather die here than fade in your waiting room." She turned on her heel. Emma waved from the back seat as they drove off. I waved back, steady. The city has a way of testing resolve. By the third week, whispers reached me, neighbors mentioning that Charles and Nora were petitioning for support, painting me as a bitter old man standing in the way of progress. Progress is a word people use when they want your silence signed on paper. I fixed brake pads while customers told me about flyers near the college, about social media posts framing the eviction as cruelty. I nodded, handed back keys, and refused to explain. A man explaining is a man defending. I was done with both. At night, I'd sit by the window with coffee, watching shadows play on the bricks across the alley. I remembered my father, who worked rail until his lungs blackened. He never defended himself either. When the union folded, when the bosses sneered, he simply stopped showing up and built shelves in our basement until his heart quit. Maybe silence runs in the family, but I was beginning to think voice could too. Sunday dinner was my battlefield. Charles came alone, contrite smile, sleeves rolled. "Let me cook, Dad," he said, already reaching for my pan, as though the kitchen were still his stage. I let him. The smell of onions softened the air, but not the conversation. "Patients are suffering," he began. Dozens had to reschedule. We had to cancel sessions. "You'll adapt," I said. "Every business does." He turned, wooden spoon in hand like a gavel. "You're treating us like strangers. You asked to be treated like family, not tenants. And then you handed a card to a man who's not your father." He winced, as if onions bit him. "That was a gesture. It was a verdict," I said quietly. "And now here we are, appealing." He didn't argue further, just stirred. But I saw his shoulders tighten with every circle of the spoon. Later that week, Nora tried a different tactic. All eyes. She brought her father to the shop. Crisp suit, gold cufflinks, Lexus idling out front like a guard dog. He looked around with theatrical distaste. "Quite the operation," he said. "I see why you're so attached." I wiped my hands. "And I see why you prefer cars with no grease under the hood." He smirked. "Charles tells me you're making things difficult. I'm sure we could reach an arrangement." "I already have one," I said, tapping the framed deed by the door. "Signed, sealed, and older than your golf clubs." His eyes narrowed, then softened into condescension. "You're an old man clinging to rust. Let the young build. Isn't that what fathers do?" I leaned closer. A father builds space for his son to grow, not for his son to bury him. He straightened, offended by the steel in my tone. Nora touched his arm, guiding him out, whispering that it wasn't worth it. But his glare promised me more than Lexus keys. It promised war. War came in paperwork. Notices from city inspectors, surprise visits about zoning, anonymous complaints about hazardous waste. I knew the source. These things don't appear by chance. Each letter felt like a shove, each inspector's glance like a question. Are you still standing? I stood. I showed them permits, invoices, decades of compliance. Bureaucracy is just another end. Keep the parts clean. It runs. At night, exhaustion pressed heavy, but pride steadied me. I thought of Emma's red door. She had given me a symbol, perhaps without knowing. Every time fear tried to enter, I saw that door shutting firm. Then Emma herself returned, slipping from Nora's car during one visit, running into the shop before her mother noticed. "Grandpa," she said breathlessly, "Daddy cries now. Mommy says it's your fault." I crouched, wiped her hair back. "Adults cry for many reasons, Emma. Sometimes because they're learning." She frowned, "But learning hurts." "Yes," I said, "but pain teaches faster than gifts." Nora stormed in then, furious, dragging Emma out with sharp fingers. She spat over her shoulder. "You're poisoning her against us." I didn't answer. Truth doesn't need a witness. It waits. Then, one icy Sunday, the silence broke. Charles appeared, gaunt, eyes rimmed, voice softer than the wind outside. He stood in the doorway, hands bare, no car keys, no bravado. The rumors had become a man, hollowed out by their truth. "Dad," he said, and the word finally landed on me instead of through me. I don't know what to do. I motioned him in, silent. He sat on the stool Emma favored, shoulders collapsing. I thought success meant proving something. To you, to her, to everyone. But all I proved is, I don't know who I am without your roof. I wanted to reach for it. Instead, I tightened the bolt on a carburetor, giving the moment space to breathe. Then I said, a man doesn't find himself in gifts or clinics or cars. He finds himself when he stops trying to erase the one who raised him. He nodded slowly, tears threatening. I don't deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't earned, I said. Respect is. Start there. The heater hummed, the snow tapped against the window, and for the first time in months, I felt not invisible, but seen. Spring seeped into Chicago reluctantly, like an old tenant paying rent late. The snow melted into gray puddles that smelled of salt and exhaust. My shop windows fogged less each morning, and for the first time in years, I left the door open while I worked, letting in air and risk alike. Charles began showing up on Sundays, not with demands, but with ingredients. Bags of groceries, onions, peppers, cheap cuts of meat. He'd cook clumsily, splattering oil, oversalting the beans, but he cooked beside me. And each time, his shoulders lowered a little, as though he'd set down some invisible load. Emma returned too, this time openly, dropping her backpack on the floor as if the shop were another home. She helped wipe counters, asked endless questions about engines, and taped new drawings to the wall. A row of cars with smiling faces, each one parked under the same red door. Nora never came with them. Her absence hung in the air like cologne long after a man has left the room. One Sunday afternoon, while Charles chopped tomatoes, Emma looked up at me and asked, "Grandpa, are you going to stop loving Daddy because he made mistakes?" Her eyes were so open, so desperate for certainty, that the truth felt like a responsibility heavier than any wrench I'd ever held. I dried my hands and crouched to meet her gaze. "Emma, love doesn't vanish. It bends, it bruises. Sometimes it hides under anger, but it doesn't vanish. What does vanish is respect, if you let people step on it. And when respect goes, love limps after it." She considered that, then said, "So if Daddy learns respect, the love can walk again?" "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, it can." Behind us, Charles stopped chopping. I didn't look at him, but I felt the air shift, the weight of his listening. Later that week, I walked the building's halls, running my hand along the brick. Each scar in the mortar told me something about survival. I realized then what had changed. I no longer felt like I was guarding ruins. I was living in a house that had finally admitted who it belonged to. At night, I dreamt not of betrayal, but of doors. Doors opening, closing, locking, unlocking. and always the red one Emma had drawn, glowing steady against the dark. In early May, a letter came, this time not from lawyers or inspectors, but from Nora herself, handwritten neat the way she manages her image. She wrote of strain, of irreconcilable visions, of how she and Charles were separating, not divorced yet, but fractured. At the bottom, she added a line sharp enough to cut. "Perhaps this is the lesson you wanted him to learn." I read it twice. The words didn't surprise me, but the cold twist of them did. She was still framing herself as the victim of my lesson, as if Charles's awakening was a punishment I had willed upon her, not a consequence she had co-authored. For a moment, a flicker of the old guilt tried to ignite. Had the price of his respect been the ruin of his marriage? Then I looked at Charles, patiently degreasing a transmission filter, his focus real and unformulated for any audience. This wasn't ruin. This was repair. Her letter was the last piece of paperwork from a project I hadn't commissioned. I folded it carefully and placed it in the shoebox with old invoices. Not triumph, not grief, just a receipt for a debt I hadn't incurred. The following Sunday, Charles arrived along with Emma. He set down groceries, then placed a sealed envelope on the table. "First month's rent," he said quietly. "Market rate, like you asked." I didn't open it, just nodded. Respect doesn't need applause. That evening, as we ate, Emma raised her glass of milk. "To the red door," she said. We clinked glasses, hers, mine, Charles's, and for a brief, fragile second, the shop felt like a home rebuilt from ashes. I sit here now, telling you this, in the same kitchen where I once unwrapped $15 flip-flops while another man drove off in a Lexus. The building hums with summer heat. The shop below still smells of grease and survival. But everything is different, because I finally closed one door and painted another red. Walking back to my cot later, I understood something I hadn't before. All those years, I thought abandonment was my wound. But what I truly suffered from was invisibility. And invisibility ends the moment you refuse to hand out the eraser. I had closed the door, and in doing so, found one opening inside myself. The revenge I thought I wanted had shifted shape. It wasn't about watching them collapse. It was about standing tall enough that they had to lift their eyes again, and they did. I wrote one last note in my ledger. Respect collected. If you've ever been erased by those who should have seen you first, hear me. You are not invisible unless you agree to be. Dignity doesn't arrive as a gift. You reclaim it, bolt by bolt, decision by decision. This is my story. My revenge wasn't fire or ruin. It was teaching respect, one locked door at a time. If you've been there, if you've felt what it's like to vanish in your own family, subscribe to Dear Revenge. Support this channel so more voices can be heard, more stories like mine told. Because every time one of us stands, another learns they can too. And that, I've learned, is the sweetest revenge of all. The thing about doors is that even the sturdy ones creak at night. In July, strange noises began, soft steps in the hallway after midnight, a whisper of draft where no window should leak. Twice I found the back entrance unlatched at dawn. Nothing taken, nothing broken. The absence was the message. You can make a man doubt his own locks without stealing a thing. On the third night, I waited in the dark shop. Lights off, coffee cooling on the bench, the space heater asleep. Around 2, the knob turned. I didn't reach for the wrench. I reached for patience. The door opened an inch, and I saw the slice of a face thin, impatient, the father-in-law. I clicked on the lamp. He froze, caught in a narrow theater of light. "Lose something?" I asked. He recovered fast. "You think this building is a fortress. It's a shoebox with delusions. A shoebox I pay for." He stepped inside and shut the door with unearned intimacy. "You could have let the clinic stay. We would have paid, eventually. But no, you needed a performance. I needed respect. Respect, dignity, doors, such big words for such a small life." He smiled then, and I saw what fueled him. Not love for Nora, not concern for Charles, but appetite. Men like him eat other men's histories and call it caviar. "What do you want?" I asked. "To remind you what power looks like." He slid a folder onto my bench. Inside, printed screenshots, my face in unflattering freeze frames, my shop from bad angles, captions accusing me of elder neglect, unsafe work practices, predatory rent, anonymous accounts, hundreds of comments, a digital crowd with torches I couldn't see, only feel. Public opinion is a tool, he said lightly. You taught a door to close. I'll teach one to slam. I closed the folder. I've survived tools worse than yours. His eyes glittered. Let's see if your permits survive too. He left with the smell of expensive cologne and cowardice trailing behind him. I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled the old banker's boxes from the back. Ledgers, receipts, maintenance logs. A mechanic's life is proof on paper. By dawn, I had assembled a spine of documents stronger than rumor. 2 days later, the inspector returned, accompanied by a younger woman with a notebook and a gaze that missed nothing. We've had complaints, he began. I imagine, I said, handing him a stack. Fire extinguishers serviced. Ventilation cleared. Disposal manifests for every drop of oil. The woman read quickly, occasionally glancing at the walls. Her eyes rested on Emma's red door drawing, then on the framed deed. She lowered the papers. Everything appears compliant, she said, not looking at the inspector. In fact, unusually well documented for a shop this age. I met her eyes. When people try to erase you, you learn to keep ink. They left without citations. That evening, Charles arrived with Emma and a humble bag of peaches. We ate them leaning over the sink, juice on our wrists. The simple ritual stronger than any algorithms. But the father-in-law didn't stop. Flyers appeared again, slicker now, hinting that an accident had occurred in my shop years ago. A hidden injury, a cover-up. The date they listed was the same summer Frank died at the mill. It wasn't just a smear. It was a theft of the dead. I drove to the south side, to the house of Frank's widow, now 90 and formidable. She remembered me before I introduced myself. You were the quiet boy with good hands, she said, ushering me in. Her living room held a small museum of a working man's life retirement plaques, faded Polaroids, a bowling trophy. I showed her the flyer. They're using my husband's fire to smoke you out, she said, eyes sharp. Frank died on a Wednesday. You brought me coffee on Thursday. Don't let liars edit Wednesdays into Mondays. She retrieved a box of papers and photos. Take what you need. Back at the shop, I assembled a different kind of engine. Affidavits, dates, the obituary, union notes, a copy of the mill's report. Each piece a bolt, each fact a tooth on a gear. I didn't post online. I waited. When the father-in-law came again, arrogant enough to return, I slid the folder across the bench. You're not just smearing me, I said. You're trespassing on a widow's grief. You're manufacturing a past you have no right to touch. He skimmed, slower this time. His composure faltered, then reset. No one cares about paperwork, old man. People care about what holds when pushed, I said. Papers held this building longer than your Lexus will hold its value. He stood. We'll see. But when he left, he didn't look back. Men like him rely on echoes. Silence unnerves them. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept hard. In late August, a storm lashed the city. The alley flooded to the ankles. Thunder made the windows tremble like nervous teeth. Emma and Charles were supposed to come for Sunday dinner, but the sky canceled plans. At 9, the phone rang. Unknown number. I let the machine catch it. A woman's voice, low, careful. Mr. Gutierrez, I'm calling from Lakeshore Community Hospital. We have a patient here, a minor Emma. I lifted the receiver so fast the cord slapped the wall. Is she hurt? She's stable, the voice said quickly. Brought in with her mother after a traffic incident. The mother insisted we call you. My heart, an old motor, knocked against its casing. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my coat, and ran through rain that felt like someone else's anger. At the hospital, fluorescent brightness grated after the storm's honest dark. I found Emma propped up in a bed, cheeks sallow with shock, a butterfly bandage above her eyebrow. Nora sat beside her, pale, composed beyond reason. Emma saw me and cried. I kissed her forehead, tasted saline and fear. I'm here, I said. A doctor explained. A near miss on Lake Shore Drive. A swerve. A grazed barrier. Nothing broken. Luck, they said, in that professional tone that pretends luck is a procedure. Nora kept her eyes on Emma's blanket. When we were briefly alone in the hallway, she said, without greeting, "He did this." "Who?" "My father," she whispered. "He's been pushing. Posts, inspectors, the works. You know that. But tonight he insisted we drive over to settle things with you. Said he'd follow and make sure we came." I refused. He followed anyway. I sped to lose him. "Stupid," Emma screamed. I swerved. She exhaled, a dry, flat sound. "This is not how I win." I studied her face. Something had cracked, not her pride, not yet, but the glass case around it. "Where is he now?" "Waiting," she said. "Always waiting. He thinks persistence is virtue." She looked at me then, eyes raw. "I won't let him near Emma again." I nodded. "Then don't. Doors go both ways." She flinched at the word. After a moment, she said, "I'm tired of wars fought with mouths. I'll sign whatever you need to keep him out." She paused, including the clinic. We returned to Emma. She asked if I could take her home when the storm cleared. Nora didn't argue. In the morning, I brought them to my building. Emma slept on my cot, impossibly small and uncomplaining. Nora stood in the shop, staring at the red door drawing. "You painted it," she said softly. "I did. I thought it was a bluff. Then learned to read." For the first time, she smiled without performance. "Fair." She reached into her purse and handed me a document, the clinic's remaining keys. A short letter renouncing any claim to the space, and a restraining notice she wanted me to witness. "For him," she said, meaning her father. The storm passed. Sun scattered on the wet street like loose change. Charles arrived, alarmed by my message from the hospital, then relieved, then guilty. He hugged Emma hard, then looked at Nora with the eyes of a man who has finally stopped performing and started listening. We ate bread and eggs and silence at my kitchen table. After, as I walked them to the stairs, the shop's door creaked. Not the red one, my own. A shadow crossed the threshold. The father-in-law stood there, raincoat dripping, expression neutral as a receipt. Nora moved in front of Emma. I stepped between him and the room. He looked at the drawing on the wall, then at the keys in my hand, then at the paper Nora still held. For the first time, he seemed to register that we were not parts to be wrenched, but people arranged by choice. "This isn't over," he said, but it fell flat, like a battery struggling to turn an engine in winter. "It is," Nora said, voice steady. "For you, it is." He looked at her, then at me, and something old sagged in his posture, the arrogance that had kept him upright when affection should have. He left without slamming the door. Weak men saved their strength for exits. That night I sat alone after they'd gone, the storm smell still in the wood. I ran a hand over the red paint dry, solid, and understood that revenge had become something else entirely. A carpenter's job. Measure twice. Cut once. Close what needs closing. Leave what must breathe. Weeks later, routine returned like an honest friend. Sundays with onions and radios. Rent in envelopes. Emma's laughter running ahead of her into the shop. I'd begun to think the story had ended where it should. Not with a bang, but with the door settling into its frame. Then, just after midnight on a Tuesday, the phone rang. A voice I hadn't heard in 40 years. Thinner now, but intact. "Orlando?" I sat up hard, stumbling. "Marina?" My ex-wife breathed once, a small tide. "I heard about the clinic, about Charles, about you. What do you want?" I asked, gentler than the words. "To return something," she said. Paper rustled through the line. "You remember the ledger I took when I left? The one with the first months you bought the building? Your notes in pencil?" I remember. I remembered every page. I remembered the day it vanished. "I kept it," she said. "All these years. Thought it would hurt you to know. I was wrong. It hurt me. I'm mailing it tomorrow." Another pause. "I'm coming to Chicago. I think there's something in those pages neither of us finished." When the line went dead, I stared at the phone, at the doorway, at the red square on the wall. The past had found the doorbell. Maybe this was the last lesson. You can close a door and still hear a knock. Dignity isn't a wall, it's a hinge. I set an extra plate on the table and laughed at myself, then left it there anyway. If the ledger returned, if Marina returned, if Charles and Emma showed up with onions and questions, we would open what could be opened and close what could not. That's all a man can do in a city that keeps breathing, in a building that remembers every winter. Dear Revenge, some endings aren't neat. Some are simply a phone ringing in the night and a man deciding whether to answer. Mine rang. I picked up. Another day ends. Thank you for accompanying me this far. Please subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and good night.